Turkey's new central bank chief says he plans to keep the country's monetary policy tight as the battered economy tries to rein in inflation. The newly appointed Fatih Karahan said his top priority would be to stabilize prices and getting inflation closer to the target. Karahan was appointed just hours after the former governor stepped down. She cited a character assassination by the media that included claims of nepotism. This is the sixth central bank chief they have had in just the past 5 years. And this all comes as inflation makes the biggest monthly increase since last summer. According to the data by the central bank, monthly inflation jumped 6.7%, headline inflation hitting 65%. Healthcare costs, as well as prices with hotels and cafes and restaurants, showed the largest monthly increases. Food, housing, and transportation also showed big jumps. Economists say a big reason is the mandatory minimum wage increase of 49%. For more on insight on Turkey's economy, I'm joined by Max Gillman, professor of economy history at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Thanks for coming on to the show. This is a real challenging time. What is Turkey going to do with this inflation number that I think it's hard for people to comprehend?
Good evening, Phil, and thank you for having me on. You're right. The high inflation in Turkey is now about 65%. And this is devastating, especially to the lower income people, because their wages don't tend to rise with the rate of inflation. They lag behind. So their real income falls dramatically.
And this effort to rebuild the country's infrastructure from, a lot of us have forgotten about these earthquakes, but you know, once the media is gone, this takes not months, years, and it takes years of planning, years of investment to rebuild that infrastructure. Where does that stand now?
Well, you're right, and President Erdogan has emphasized building infrastructure. Of course, that was before the earthquake a year ago, the tragic, horrible event. I think now that, you know, he has to focus on the housing code and he has to spend a lot of money. And that is the relationship to the inflation rate that Turkey is currently suffering. Because when the government has to, you know, spend a lot on infrastructure, has to rebuild a large swath of southeastern Turkey because of the earthquake, this additional expenditure has to be financed somehow. And so the way the expenditure is financed is by raising taxes. But when the taxes aren't sufficient, you have a budget deficit, a gap between what is being spent and what is being raised in revenue. And so what happens when you have a budget deficit in a place like Turkey is you finance it by printing money, by the central bank buying the government debt. That's the way the mechanism works. The central bank gives freshly printed money to the Treasury. The Treasury spends it on infrastructure development. And when the money supply goes up at a high rate of growth, the inflation rate accelerates. And that's what's happening now in Turkey.
So if I'm reading you correctly, the reverse of what they're trying to do, which is essentially stop printing the money. If you stop printing the money, then inflation should get under control. And then the previous central bank person also had raised rates up quite a bit as well. You would think that would have perhaps put a stall to inflation.
Bill, you're absolutely right. The last central bank governor did a large increase, but unfortunately she wasn't given sufficient time. The new one was the the deputy governor, and this Karahan, he is a very well-respected and esteemed economist in the United States. He got his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. He publishes in the top journals in America, in the United States, in the world, really, in economics. So he worked at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So he's a very well-qualified person to step in as central bank governor. And I think what he will have to do is raise the interest rate up above the rate of inflation. Right now, the interest rate he raised up to 65%. No, I'm sorry, to 45%. But with inflation going at 65%, my prediction is that they will have to raise the interest rate higher, above 65%. And
Right.
in the process, when you raise the interest rate, you lower the rate of growth of the money supply.
Right, and quite frankly, you might end up lowering the rate of growth and hurt the growth of the economy, at least in the short run. Now, Erdogan, to his credit or discredit, did not want rates originally to be sky high to fight inflation or anything else out there. So if what you're saying is correct, this would go against what Erdogan originally wanted to do. Is that right?
Bill, I have to tell you that I met with President Erdogan back in September of 2022 at the Presidential Palace. We had a breakfast meeting, and there was a group of us that was invited by the Treasury Ministry. And he actually told us that, yes, he was following Putin. Putin told him, no, you don't want to raise interest rates. You want to have them lower than the inflation rate, even though that's not orthodox economic policy. That's not the traditional policy. And he told us in person that he thought that, yes, his friend Putin was right. So he had interest rates way below the inflation rate, which was up to 80% at the time. And so he reversed course. After the election, he fired the Treasury Minister who invited us to Istanbul, and he brought in a new Treasury person and the new central bank person. And the first thing they did was raise the interest rate. But they will have to, so you're right, they completely reversed policy, and I expect they will have to keep raising the interest rate until it gets above the inflation rate.
Max, I think the lesson here is that you may need to go back for another breakfast and assist them in getting the economy healthy again. It sounds like they're at least a couple steps into it, so hopefully things will get better. I appreciate your time on this topic.
Thank you, Phillip. Pleasure to be here.
All right, likewise.